Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Thursday, January 29th, 2026. And look, I think we need to just take a deep breath before we start today. If you have glanced at your phone, turned on the TV, or even just walked past a newsstand in the last 48 hours, you know the world feels, well, heavy. The tension between Washington and Tehran isn't just simmering anymore. It feels like it's actively boiling over. We're seeing carrier strike groups moving into position. We are seeing nationwide protests across Iran and, these internet blackouts that have basically turned the country into a digital black hole.
It is a chaotic moment, to say the least.
Yeah.
And, usually when the news cycle gets this loud, clarity is the first casualty. It's incredibly difficult right now to separate the actual signal from the noise.
And there is a tremendous amount of noise.
A tremendous amount, yeah.
Yeah.
We're hearing threats, we're seeing troop movements, and we're seeing a lot of pundits, shouting over each other.
Yeah. That is exactly why we're doing this today. We aren't here to just doom scroll through headlines or, panic about World War III. We're digging into a fascinating, and I have to say, slightly terrifying piece of research. It's titled U.S.-Iran Confrontation Dynamics, an extended academic analysis by a Dr. Fareed Novin. And I want to be clear up front, this isn't some cable news hot take. This is a rigorous, almost ruthless academic dissection of the mechanics behind this crisis.
Exactly. Novin's work is, I think, essential right now because he steps back from the who said what of the last 24 hours, and he looks at the structural patterns. His main argument is that we, and by we he means the West, the media, policymakers, we are looking at Iran through a cracked lens. And the paper's central thesis is that if we don't fix that lens, we're going to miscalculate the risk in a catastrophic way.
So our mission today is to decode the playbook. We want to understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening and where this train is actually headed. But before we get into the heavy theory, let's just ground ourselves in the facts. Where do we stand right now, today, January 29th?
Okay, let's lay out the visible reality. The nationwide protests in Iran started about a month ago, on December 28th, 2025. They began largely over economic conditions, inflation, unemployment, but they morphed into political unrest very, very quickly. Since January 8th, so for about 3 weeks now, the regime has imposed a near-total internet blackout.
Which means we're getting very little verifiable footage out of the country. It's a blackout in every sense of the word.
Almost none. Yeah. Meanwhile, on the military front, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is parked in the region. President Trump has publicly stated that the force posture is greater than those used in Venezuela. And on the flip side, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi is using very specific, very dangerous language, stating that their armed forces have fingers on the trigger.
So the pieces are on the board, but this is where Dr. Novin's paper just throws a wrench in the gears. He argues that our biggest problem right now isn't the missiles or the aircraft carriers, it's an information void.
Right. He calls it an epistemological challenge.
Okay, well, let's de-jargon that for a second. Epistemological challenge.
Yeah, fair enough. It sounds complex, but it's really just a fancy way of asking, how do we know what we think we know? Because of that internet blackout since January 8th, independent verification is impossible. We are effectively flying blind. We can't see the streets of Tehran. We can't see troop movements inside the country. But here's the thing about human nature. The human brain hates a vacuum. When we don't have hard data, we fill the gap with stories. And usually, we listen to the people telling the best stories.
Which brings us to what I thought was the most critical warning in the entire report. Novin talks about something called the representative agent fallacy. And honestly, once I understood this, I started seeing it everywhere.
This is at the core of the danger. The representative agent fallacy is a concept borrowed from economics, but here it applies to intelligence and politics. It's the mistake of assuming that a single vocal person or a specific group, usually from the diaspora living outside the country, accurately represents the entire population of that nation.
So it's assuming the part represents the whole, like asking a New Yorker what everyone in Kansas thinks about farming.
It's even worse than that. It's like asking someone who left Kansas 40 years ago what people in Kansas think today. And the paper makes a comparison here that really makes you sit up straight. It points directly back to 2003. Iraq.
Ahmed Chalabi.
I remember the name. He was the head of the Iraqi National Congress, right? The guy who basically convinced Washington that invading Iraq would be a cakewalk.
That's him. And it's crucial to remember why he was so effective. Chalabi was charming, he wore Western suits, he spoke perfect English, and he told policymakers exactly what they wanted to hear. We possess WMDs, the people hate Saddam, you will be greeted as liberators. The U.S. based a massive amount of its strategy on his intel.
And he was wrong on almost everything. Catastrophically wrong. He hadn't lived in Iraq for decades. He had no idea what the actual street-level sentiment was. But he was the representative agent that the West chose to listen to because he was accessible and persuasive. Novin argues we are doing the exact same thing right now with Iran. He points to figures like Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah.
Who has been living in the U.S. for, what, 48 years?
Since 1979. Think about that. That's nearly half a century. That is longer than the Islamic Republic has even existed. The force identifies two huge logical errors we make when we listen to figures like this. First is selection bias. The people who flee a regime are, by definition, the ones who oppose it most strongly. They're not a random sample. If you base your view of a country only on the people who ran away from it, you're getting a skewed data set.
And the second error?
Temporal displacement. This is fascinating. It means their memory of the country is frozen in the year they left. They're offering advice on an Iran that existed in 1978. But the people protesting on the streets of Tehran today, they're living in the reality of 2026. They have entirely different grievances, different cultural touchstones, different fears. They've lived through decades of sanctions, wars, and cultural shifts that the exiles just missed.
So we have policymakers in D.C. getting briefed by guys in suits who haven't seen Tehran since the disco era, assuming they speak for a 20-year-old student in Isfahan today.
Exactly. And if you build a war plan based on that assumption that the regime will crumble immediately because this guy in Maryland says, you are walking into a trap, you're betting on a phantom population that might not even exist.
Okay, so we've got bad intel filling the void. But let's look at the mechanics of the pressure campaign itself. The source material references Professor John J. Mearsheimer, he's a big deal in realist foreign policy circles, and his regime change template. It reads like a literal checklist for toppling a government.
It is a checklist. We've seen this template applied in Libya, in Syria, in Ukraine. Novin argues we're watching it run in real time in Iran right now. Mearsheimer breaks it down into 4 distinct stages.
Walk us through them. What's step 1?
Stage 1 is economic warfare. You don't start with bombs, you start with banks. You use sanctions to degrade the economy until the public is miserable.
Well, looking at the data, that's checked. Inflation in Iran is officially 42%. But the source says, practically speaking, for essential goods, it's much, much higher. The currency, the rial, has crashed to historic lows.
Right. The goal is to make daily life unbearable so the people blame the government. That leads to stage 2. The facilitation of protests. This isn't just hoping people get mad. It involves active encouragement, funding, providing technology. The source specifically mentions reports of Starlink terminals being smuggled in to bypass that internet blackout.
Which creates a communication network the regime can't control.
Exactly. Then comes stage 3, information operations. This is where you frame the narrative globally. You present the destabilization as purely organic and
spontaneous.
Yeah. You ignore the sanctions, you ignore the external funding, and you say, look, the people are rising up. We must support them.
And finally, stage 4.
Military intervention. Once the target government is weakened, delegitimized, and distracted by internal chaos, you send in the cavalry or, the carrier strike group.
Now, I want to pause here because this is where it gets tricky. We need to be nuanced. The source isn't saying the protests aren't real, right? I mean, people are legitimately suffering. We've seen the pictures from before the blackout.
No, and that is a critical distinction to make. Novin emphasizes this is hybrid warfare. It's not binary. It's not organic versus foreign plot. It is both. The economic pain is real. The grievances against the strict social rules are real. But the argument is that external actors are systematically exploiting that genuine pain to achieve a geopolitical goal.
It's weaponizing misery.
That is a grim but, accurate way to put it. You take authentic anger and you pour gasoline on it.
Okay, so the playbook is running. We're hovering somewhere between stage 3 and stage 4. The assumption, the Chalabi assumption, is that if we push just a little harder, the Iranian regime collapses and the problem is solved. But the source spends a lot of time explaining why Iran is absolutely not Iraq.
And this is the reality check that usually gets missed in the 24-hour news cycle. If you look at the map and the demographics, Iran is a fortress compared to Iraq.
Give us the specs. Why is it so different?
Start with population. Iraq in 2003 had about 25 million people. Iran today has 89 million. And it is a highly literate, technically educated population. This isn't a hollow state. It has a deep national identity that goes back thousands of years.
And the geography. I know Iraq is largely flat, desert and river valleys.
Iran is a nightmare for an invader. It is massive, but more importantly, it is defined by the Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges. These provide strategic depth. You can't just drive a tank column to the capital in 3 days like the U.S. did in the drive to Baghdad. There are thousands of valleys, cave complexes, hardened sites to hide missiles, command centers, and insurgents. There's no easy decapitation strike.
And then there's the energy aspect, the Strait of Hormuz.
The jugular of the global economy. 21% of the world's daily petroleum consumption passes through that tiny choke point. If a war kicks off, Iran doesn't have to win on the battlefield. They just have to mine the strait or sink a few tankers.
And if 20% of the world's oil vanishes overnight?
We're looking at $200, maybe $300 a barrel oil. The global economy goes into immediate cardiac arrest. Supply chains break, transportation costs skyrocket. It affects everything from food prices to manufacturing.
But the source also mentions something even more direct regarding the military risk. It references the June 2025 war. Now, for you listening, let's recap that briefly because the news cycle moves so fast we sometimes forget what happened just 6 months ago.
Right. This was the 12-day war. It was a limited conflict, but it revealed something crucial that changed the calculus. During that exchange, Iranian ballistic missiles successfully penetrated Israeli air defenses, some of the most advanced in the world, and they struck near U.S. forward bases in Qatar.
That effectively blew up the whole "they can't touch us" narrative.
Completely. They have over 3,000 ballistic missiles. This isn't a theoretical threat. They have demonstrated the capability to hit back and hit back with precision. Deterrence is a two-way street now. In 2003, Saddam Hussein had nothing. Iran has a loaded gun pointed at every U.S. base in the region.
So if they have this deterrence and if the geography is a nightmare, why are we seeing this push for escalation? The source talks about something called the unacceptable offer. This sounds like something out of a mob movie.
It is classic, if cynical, diplomatic strategy. The source compares the current U.S. demands, things like give up all uranium enrichment forever, dismantle the entire missile program, to the ultimatum Austria-Hungary gave Serbia in 1914.
The one that started World War I.
Exactly. The logic works like this. You make an offer that is so extreme, so humiliating, that you know the other side cannot accept it without committing political suicide. It is designed to be rejected.
Why would you do that?
So that when they inevitably say no, you can turn to the world and say, look, we tried diplomacy. We gave them a chance. They are being unreasonable. It gives you the pretext you need to move to stage 4.
Military intervention.
It validates the escalation.
So it's a trap. It's diplomacy used as a weapon to clear the path for war.
It certainly appears that way. The source argues these aren't genuine attempts to find a middle ground. They are procedural steps on a ladder toward conflict.
But, and this is a big but that I think every American listener needs to hear, can we actually afford this? I look at my grocery bill, I look at the housing market. The U.S. economy isn't exactly in 1990s boom mode.
That is the other side of the coin that Movin highlights, the domestic cost. We are entering this crisis with U.S. federal debt at 123% of GDP as of January 2026. That is historic. We have never gone into a major power conflict with the credit card this maxed out.
123%. That is higher than it was at the end of World War II.
Yes. And wars are incredibly expensive. Estimates suggest a full-blown conflict with Iran. Not even a ground invasion, just a sustained air and sea war could cost between $500 billion and $1 trillion.
Where is that money coming from?
That is the trillion-dollar question. The markets are already signaling trouble. Oil is trending up. Gold is strong, which usually means investors are scared of the dollar losing value. If the U.S. has to print another $1 trillion to fight a war in the Middle East, the inflationary impact at home could be devastating. We are talking about risking a sovereign debt crisis.
So we are talking about a potential global recession just to force a regime change that might not even work.
And it's not just economic costs. The source warns about institutional erosion.
What does that mean in plain English?
It means the war comes home. Think back to the Patriot Act after 9/11, or even further back to the Sedition Act in WWI. When wars happen, civil liberties tend to shrink. Executive power expands. The source warns we could see increased surveillance, crackdowns on speech, and specifically the targeting of Iranian-American communities.
It creates a rally around the flag effect where questioning the war becomes seen as unpatriotic or even treasonous.
Exactly. It changes the character of the democracy itself. You lose freedoms in the name of security, and as history shows, you rarely get them back when the war ends.
Okay, so we have laid out the board. We have the faulty intel from the representative agents, we have the military nightmare of the geography, and we have the economic trap. What happens next? The source uses Bayesian analysis to give us 4 scenarios for the 2026-2028 window.
Right. Bayesian analysis is just a statistical way of updating probabilities as new info comes in. Novin has run the numbers based on current trends.
Let's run through these. Scenario 1.
Scenario 1 is managed brinkmanship. He gives this a 40% probability,
This is basically the status quo.
roughly. Lots of shouting, cyclical threats, maybe some back-channel talks via Oman or the Swiss. But nobody actually pulls the trigger on total war. It's tense, it's expensive, but it stays controlled.
Okay, 40%. That's not great, but not the worst. What's scenario 2?
Scenario 2 is escalatory miscalculation.
Yeah.
35% probability. This is the dangerous one.
The oops scenario.
Yes. Remember, everyone has their fingers on the trigger. A militia fires a rocket that hits the wrong building. A cyber attack takes down a hospital by mistake, or a radar operator misinterprets a drone. It starts a spiral that neither side actually wanted, but neither can back down from because of domestic pressure and pride.
That feels terrifyingly plausible given how high tensions are.
It is. Scenario 3 is negotiated de-escalation. Only 15%.
Why so low? Everyone says they want peace.
Because of the unacceptable offer we discussed. The red lines just don't match. The U.S. wants total capitulation, and Iran views that as suicide. It's hard to negotiate when the starting positions are that far apart.
And finally, scenario 4. This one really caught my eye. Systemic constraint. 10% probability.
This is the peace-doing capacity scenario. Essentially, the U.S. simply cannot afford the war. A debt crisis, a sudden recession, or political gridlock at home forces Washington to back down. Not because they want peace, but because the bank account is empty.
That is a sobering thought, that our safety valve isn't wisdom, but bankruptcy.
It is a harsh assessment, but the economic data backs it up. The U.S. is not economically positioned for a high-intensity conflict right now.
So let's wrap this up. What does this all mean for us, for you listening, trying to make sense of the news today?
I think the main takeaway is skepticism. We need to be incredibly wary of the Chalabi effect. When you hear experts on TV saying the regime is about to fall and it will be easy, ask yourself, who are they? When was the last time they were in Tehran? Are they telling us what is actually happening or what they want to happen?
And we need to broaden the lens beyond just the military movement. This isn't just about aircraft carriers. It's about the global economy, your 401k, and the price of gas.
Absolutely. The source puts it perfectly. We need analytical humility. History judges not just the decisions we make, but how we reach them. Are we seeing the reality on the ground, or are we seeing a fantasy projected by exiles?
If we let the representative agent fallacy drive policy again.
We are walking right back into 2003, expecting flowers and getting an IED.
And this time, against an adversary that can shoot back and with an economy that can't foot the bill.
It's a high-stakes gamble with very bad odds.
That is a heavy thought to end on, but a necessary one. We are going to keep tracking this as the situation develops. But for now, take a breath, check your sources, and maybe read a little history.
Couldn't hurt.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We will see you next time.